City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Porter.
I'm here.
Councilmember Austin Lane. Councilmember Berry. Councilmember Clay.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Snipper.
Here.
Councilmember Williams.
Here.
We have a quorum of the council. So the next item on the agenda is council comments and other items. Anyone have any comments? Announcements? Colleen?
Well, I'm so excited because the work has begun on the Elm Auburn traffic calming and the Elm Lincoln traffic calming, and the new sidewalk boundary has been poured and the new curb line has been poured, and the neighbors are all talking about it and standing out in the street and pointing and looking. It's all very good. Makes me very happy. And I want to thank the planning department for pulling it together in such a great way, and the Public Works Department, and it looks like it's going to be done pretty rapidly, so I'm so excited.
Okay, anybody else? I'd like to mention a couple of things. On Tuesday, I was in Annapolis at a hearing for the municipal aggregation bill. It's now been heard on both the House and the Senate side. It's still proceeding through, and we don't know yet what its disposition is going to be. I think Suzanne is going to talk a little bit more about that. Also, I was present along with the police chief at a meeting of the Old Town Business Association to talk about the problems with robberies in the Old Town and Tacoma Junction areas. I thought it was a very useful meeting. The chief gave them a very good sense of where things were and some good tips for keeping the businesses safe. They also had, after the chief spoke, a number of business owners mentioned things that they had done to keep their business safe, and I thought that was very useful also. I thought it was a very good meeting and well put together. If there's nothing else, we'll move on to the public comment period. This is the time set aside on the agenda for comments on items that are not on our special session agenda. If you have comments on the special session agenda items, I'd ask if you would hold those till we get to those items. At this time or later, when you come forward, would you please identify yourself, and would you also keep your comments to 3 minutes? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue in Tacoma Park. I would like to greatly thank Barbara, our city manager, and our new police chief, Chief Ragucci, for coming over to the Franklin Apartments for our monthly birthday luncheon, the potluck luncheon. They came over and they met the residents of Franklin Apartments over here at 7620, and we had such a great time. The people there loved it, and they were all very thankful that he came over. And also, I want to thank Terry Siemens and Joyce Siemens for the work that they've been doing to keep that luncheon going. Because without Terry Siemens and Joyce, the luncheon would not be the same. Joyce worked tirelessly for hours on end getting that luncheon together and getting people together, helping with the singing and the happy birthdays and everything. We do this every third Thursday. And Joyce and Terry are there all the time. And without Terry, Ward 4 would not be what it is today. It would be falling apart. And he's doing everything he can. And also, I want to ask a question. Is it possible to get a flag about this size here, you know, representing the city of Tacoma Park? Because I'd like to be able to have a flag of Tacoma Park when I go down to the big peace demonstrations. Because I'm really proud of what my city has been doing in advancing the cause of peace. And it'd be very, very great. And also, if it's possible to get the kids in the schools to be able to come over to the council meetings like that kid Jared, if I'm pronouncing it right, did a couple of weeks ago when he spoke about the bridge, made me feel proud to see an 8-year-old getting up and addressing our city government much the same way as I do, because that's what the beginning of activism is. It would be really great if we could get the youth of our city to stand up like he did and be proud citizens of Tacoma Park. And also, I'd love to see if we can get a flag at Tacoma Park so I can take that down to the next peace demonstrations and probably fly it right beside the American flag. Thanks for letting me share. And thank you again, Chief Ragucci and Barbara. Thank you very much for coming to my apartment.
I don't know the answer to the question about the flag pet, but we can maybe find out. I know that I asked some time back and we were out of them, but we were talking about maybe getting some more, so I don't know what's happened. This was years and years ago, so we should probably look into it.
Well, that would be wonderful, because I'd love to be able to have that city well represented at the next peace demonstrations and every event I go to, because I am very proud to be a resident of Tacoma Park.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any comments they'd like to make at the public comment period? All right, seeing no one else, we'll move on to the city manager's update.
Yeah, I'd like to take this opportunity just to thank the residents of the Franklin Apartments for having Chief Rakucci and I as their guest. It's always a nice event, and they're very warm and very friendly, so thank you to all of them who may be watching. I wanted to give the council an update on the status of the new elevator installation. As I had mentioned probably in the past one or two reports, we're now at the stage where there's a series of inspections and testing. Last Thursday, the required third-party inspection took place, and it's the city's understanding that that inspection went well. The appropriate documents have been forwarded to the State of Maryland Inspector's Office, which basically has the responsibility for doing the final inspection. Obviously, they somewhat set their own time schedule, but it's our understanding that they are required to respond within 15 days upon receipt of a request. So as soon as we have an actual inspection date from the state, I'll share that with the council and with the community. The other item I just wanted to mention relative to the community center is that we did have a meeting last week with James F. Knott Construction, who was the contractor for Phase 1. As part of our continuing efforts to try to resolve all outstanding issues. I'm pleased to report they did have some personnel on site last week addressing some items. There are a few follow-ups that have to occur from that meeting. The architect and the contractor will be having some discussions regarding the punch list just to clarify some items in terms of the actual work that is still required that they do. In some instances, the contractor actually thought the items were done, so there'll need to be some further discussions between the project architect and the contractor. But it was nice to basically be sitting at the table and trying to work together to resolve the issues. We have a conference call this Thursday to talk about the flooring issue, which is in the public safety plaza. As the council may recall, this was an issue where the city had some concerns about the cracking in the Fritz tile, and we need to have some further discussions about whether they replace the Fritz tile or we ask that another type of flooring material be installed that perhaps is a little bit more flexible and not as prone to cracking. We just simply ran out of time last week, so we will be having that conference call Thursday afternoon to talk about that issue specifically. Unrelated to the community center project, since Councilmember Berry is not with us this evening, did want to take this opportunity just to mention that the city will be sponsoring a meeting in Ward 6 this Thursday with residents of the New Hampshire Garden Citizens Association and members of the Hillwood Manor Community Association. The meeting will begin at 7 o'clock and will be held at the Tacoma Park Recreation Center on New Hampshire Avenue. Some of the topics to be discussed will be introducing our new Chief of Police, Ron Rakucci, and giving the neighborhood an opportunity to share with him some of their public safety concerns. Sarah Daines, our Director of Housing and Community Development, will also be in attendance to update the community on the Hampshire Towers project and to talk about code enforcement, which, as you may recall, has been an ongoing concern in Ward 6. I will be in attendance as well in case there's questions on any other issues. The meeting should last about maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours at most. So certainly encourage anyone who lives in those areas to join us or anyone else in Ward 6 who would also like to participate. That concludes my report unless the council has questions about any items.
Any questions?
Not really a question, Barb, but I wanted to call your attention that the Adventist Community Services is going to be doing a cleanup along University Boulevard and New Hampshire Avenue on April 20th, as they've done in past years. And I wonder if maybe we could schedule a meeting with you and Ron Wiley from the Adventist Community Services so we can see what ways the city can support that project.
That'd be great. Just let me know.
Thank you.
All right. We're running a bit ahead of schedule at this point, but what I'd like to do is see if the folks who had applied for the Council Compensation Committee are here. Alicia Powers, Sean Tipton, John Verdi, and Deborah Zuckerman. Okay. Okay, why don't you all come forward then and sit up here at the table? I think the easiest thing to do, since you all are applying for the same committee, is to just have you all sit up there at the same time. And what I'd like to do is kick this off just by asking each of you in turn about what your interest is in the committee and what you think you'd be able to bring to the committee's deliberations. Maybe we should start with Ms. Powers.
Hi, that's me.
Okay.
Hi. Excuse me, I just recently moved to Tacoma Park in October, and I met Mr. Snipper at a neighborhood development meeting, and I was wondering how to get more involved, and he suggested this would be one way to get more involved. I guess my qualifications, how they relate to the committee, I do have a degree in statistics, so I read the report from last year and understood that there's quite a bit of analytical work to be done. So I guess that would be the best, and just general interest
Well,
in serving.
it's sometimes difficult for us to get people from Ward 5, so we're delighted to have you there.
Oh, great.
I should also say, and this won't prejudice my decision, but I notice you work at the Children's Defense
do.
Fund. I used to be at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities.
Really? Okay.
So that won't influence my decision. Although I think you obviously are highly qualified. Yes, why don't we just go across the table then?
John Verdi, and I got an email from Bruce that said that the council was looking for volunteers, and I'm happy to help if I can. I have read the report and have I have good math skills and understand it, and I have a good sense of the economy and what things cost and what it takes to keep interested people interested. And I've lived in town for just about a dozen years. And I'm happy to help if I can.
Well, thank you very much. Yes.
Hi, I'm Deborah Zuckerman. Frankly, I bumped into a friend who had been interviewed the night before, and she was telling me about the committee and what needed to be done, and I've been looking for a way to get more involved in the community and thought that this would be a good way. And I also read the report, although I'm not sure I understood all the charts, but I think as I said in my application, that the council does important work, and it's important to make sure that there's fair compensation.
It's interesting the different ways people hear about the committees. I also noticed that you're an attorney with some ADA experience also. Am I
Yes, I
right
am.
about that? There may very well be other ways that we might be able to use your expertise.
Well, then you'll have to pay me more, but
We'll pay you in line with what we get paid.
that won't influence my decision.
Right. All right, Mr. Tipton?
Yeah, I'm Sean Tipton. I live at 34 Fremont Avenue, which is in Ward 3, and I, too, was a recipient of our council members' email looking for volunteers. I did, I guess, 9 years as a member of COLTA and haven't really done anything with the city since then, and looking for an opportunity to do something else. I think have some experience in sort of the nonprofit benchmarking aspects. That is comparing what you're doing and what you're getting compensated for other things. I'm also interested in kind of broader, less mathematical questions about representation and how compensation may or may not influence questions of representation in terms of who is attracted to the position and how and why, and what how compensation might or might not impact those kind of decisions.
Mm-hmm. Well, that certainly sounds like all of you have interest in this. I would say also that if you're thinking about sort of finding out about city committees, this would be a good one to do, because it's not an ongoing committee. It has a certain set life. You give a report and then you're finished. And then if you're still interested, there's probably many other opportunities for those of you who would still be interested. So we very much appreciate all of your volunteering to do this. Are there additional questions that the council has? Yeah, Terry.
Not really a question for the interviewers, but I had a question about our process here. There was someone in the audience the last time we did interviews a couple weeks ago that had said they wanted to apply, and through whatever happened, they didn't get a form to do their application. I've got the form now.
Okay.
What's our timing on this? Are we going to have more interviews? When do we hope to make a selection?
I would think we're going to try and do a selection fairly soon, but yes, actually it's up for next week, but that doesn't mean that we can't add additional people. Why don't you make sure that the city clerk gets a hold of it as soon as possible? And I'll talk to her tomorrow afternoon, and we'll see, what we might be able to do.
Thank you. And thank you for volunteering.
If I can just suggest that if that candidate is available for next week, maybe we could do the interview next week and appoint people next week, and that keeps things going.
Yeah, I think we have 7 people that we've interviewed so far. So we could probably accommodate another one. I don't remember. The city clerk keeps track of this, so I don't remember how many members of the committee it says.
I don't think it specifies.
Okay, doesn't specify. Then we're clear. But why don't you get it to her, and I'll talk to her about it tomorrow. Any other questions? Any other comments? Bruce?
Just a quick observation that I'm glad that we didn't burn you out too bad with Colton, Sean, and the chair.
It took me a few years to recover.
Well, thank you all. I'm very pleased that we're getting some representation from a number of wards, and getting a mix of people who have some experience and people who are new to the process. And we very much appreciate your being willing to do this. Thank you. We're going to do, right now we're scheduled to do the appointments next week. And so then that'll give you all a chance to sort of organize yourselves and start going from there. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all.
We have one other interview to do, and that's John Brieskin. Is he here? As I said, we're running a bit ahead of schedule. So why don't we move through the special session items, and then if he's able to get here after that, we'll take up the final interview at that point. So why don't we go ahead and move on to the first special session item, which is the collective bargaining agreement.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I am pleased to announce that the negotiating teams have reached agreement on a contract through June of 2010. It was a long negotiation, but we've got through it. I think both sides have agreed. Some of the highlights are that we've agreed on market adjustments for each year based on the employment cost index, and we raised the minimum increase from 2.5% to 3% each year. If the cost index is below 3%, then the employees would get a 3% increase. There were increases to a number of different allowances, such as uniform allowances and night differential. We've instituted skill pay for personnel who have commercial driver's license who don't normally drive commercial vehicles, but if we need them, they'll be able to step in and do that, so we're giving them additional pay. Also, for people who operate the tub grinder, we don't have a specialty for that, but a lot of people do that, and that grinds up all the leaves every year, and that's about a 4 or 5 month continuous project. So that's taken place. The deferred compensation, city's contribution to deferred compensation was increased. We'll increase it starting July 1 of 2007 to a match of 1.5% of the individual's contribution, up to 1.5% of their annual pay, and the following year to 2%. Lots of changes into wording and procedures on performance evaluations and disciplinary procedures, which is a normal process, to try to refine those so that everybody understands them. And I think all in all we have a good contract, and I would recommend that the council ratify it.
The other thing that the employees mentioned was the issue of the performance evaluations.
There's an opening in the contract for January of '08 and January of '09. If there still exists a problem with late evaluations, I think management is pretty confident that that problem has been resolved and that will no longer exist.
Okay. All right. And probably should be noted that when you said it's been a long time, you mean it because this covers the period starting last July.
It was an 8-month project. Part of it was the union didn't come to the table until late. They didn't come to negotiate until late June, and the contract actually expired on June 30th.
Mm-hmm. But we are very pleased that the union and you all have come to an agreement, and we appreciate your long efforts to come to this point.
I did not do this by myself. The team was composed, and I should have started off and thanked both Darrell Braithwaite and Yvonne Brooks, who ably assisted me, and I think they all learned a lot about collective bargaining.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions, Bruce and then Terry?
First, can I move the resolution?
Yes.
All right. And thank you all for your patience in moving this forward. I know it took some time. I wanted to get one quick clarification. I think on the uniform allowance that it increased from 200 to 230 rather than from 30 to 230?
That's correct. That's a typo on my part.
Okay. And the CDL drivers, I'm assuming, based on the fact that it appears that the new bus hasn't moved, that we're not actually using CDL for the bus yet because we're not.
We don't have anybody hired for that position yet, or I really don't know what Deborah's planned, but that would apply to them also. If some of our
I'm just
people that work in yards drove up there, we would pay that, yes.
So that it may just be a programming issue and schedule, not necessarily that we don't have any.
Oh, we have CDL drivers, but during snow season in particular, there's a demand because they can only work so many hours. So this would enable some of the other people to drive the big equipment during that period of time.
Okay.
And be properly compensated for the additional skill that they have.
Good, that's helpful. And then just one other thing on the market adjustment and the minimum on that. I know I've questioned this in the past, and I just want to make sure I remember it correctly, that the 3% minimum means that in the off years from the market study and market adjustment is when this comes into effect, and then when you get to that year when you do the market adjustments, that's still in effect?
Not quite. We use the employment cost index put out by the Department of Labor.
Right.
We use the 12-month change as of the end of each December to compute the wages that will become effective in July so that we can budget it. That's the figure we use. We do periodic surveys, and there's some of those built into this, to make sure we're staying abreast of the market, local market.
Right.
If at that time, if there are jobs or certain we're not competitive, we would come to the council and recommend an additional increase, perhaps. We did that with police a couple years ago.
But only for those positions?
Either for those positions, or if we find the whole market is out of whack, which I doubt. We've been,
right.
At least in the last 10 years, we've been pretty much keeping up with it. But we have made minor adjustments from time to time.
And so it pretty much establishes a floor of a 3% annual increase.
Guarantees a 3% increase.
And if the index were to, say, rise at 2% a year for 10 years, everybody would still get 3.
They would still get 3.5, 3.8, whatever it is. In the past 10 years, it dipped below 3% twice, 2.5%. And it actually dropped below 2.5% 2 times. That was the former minimum,
Right.
and we gave 2.5%.
Right.
And that was also the only 2 times it dipped below 3%.
Okay. So it's mostly an academic point.
Yes.
And we're using the market index rather than the CPI. And can you just mention briefly the relative increases in those two?
We for the past 10 years, we've run somewhat ahead of the CPI. And for this past year, for instance, the CPI at the end of December for this area was 3.1%. The the employment index was 3.5. So the employees get a better deal with 3.5, and that'll be the recommendation for the increase in the coming budget. Or, well, when you approve this, you agree to that.
And the council has been very supportive of the method that we're using rather than the CPI, and in fact, the employees are better off with the one that we prefer.
That's what the stats say.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Porter. Just real quickly, I wonder if you could explain for those people watching this from home who don't keep up on these quite as in much detail as we do on the council, which employees are covered and which aren't covered by this union?
The AFSCME contract covers most of the full-time employees and part-time who work regularly 20 or more hours a week, as well as our crossing guards for non-police personnel.
Non-police?
Yes.
But it does include
It covers dispatchers and the clerical personnel within and there are certain management positions also that obviously aren't covered by the contract.
And how about crossing guards?
Crossing guards are covered by the contract.
They are covered?
That was granted back when collective bargaining first occurred in the city. They agreed to put the crossing guards under the contract, even though they don't work 20 hours a week. But that's the only exception to the 20-hour rule.
Okay, and then you mentioned the delay in getting these negotiations completed. I just wonder if you could say what effect that's had on the employees, during that period of time. Has their pay been?
I mean, their pay continued as it was as of 30 June. There were no increases granted. However, the contract provides that their pay increase will be retroactive to their regular date, so they will get any back pay. Some of the allowances that may have taken effect earlier will take effect later because it's hard to compute those. And that was a mutual agreement.
Okay.
With that.
Thank you.
Everybody else asked my question, so I have only one remaining one, which is, could you explain a little bit about the total cost? You say there are sufficient funds in the budget to cover the increases for 3.5 and so on. Can you
last year in preparation, we anticipated that we would give a 3.1% increase, and we programmed that into the FY07 budget.
Is that the only remaining question? Okay. Are there any additional questions? The resolution has been moved and seconded. Any additional council comments? Any public comments on the resolution? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The resolution passes. And then the next item is the ordinance that implements the pay scale, following up on this resolution.
This is the normal ordinance that institutes the pay scale with a 3.1% market adjustment that normally is passed along with the budget, but since we had no contract, it's been delayed till now. And it is retroactive to July 1.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Bruce?
If you can just take a minute and explain the steps on the chart on the last page, why those 4 steps are in there, and then market point and maximum.
The market point is where we think the market is for that job. When we hire a new untrained employee, they start at a lower level. And as they gain experience, basically every year they would get a step. until they hit the market, and then they are eligible only for the market increase or a distinguished performance increase.
Okay. And then just one observation that I know there's been some questions lately about the city and a living wage ordinance, and I note that the proposed state law that may go into effect in Annapolis, they're proposing $11.95 an hour as the living wage, and it looks from the charts here that all of the rates are above that, including the starting salary for somebody in the lowest grade. And so that we're covered on all of the full-time. Are there part-time?
There
at different
are
scales?
seasonal recreation employees who are much lower, but they are above the minimum wage.
Right.
Or at or above.
Yeah.
And those are usually
Did I say
high
minimum
school-
wage at first?
No, you said
Okay.
right. I was just
Yeah, I just
saying
wanna-
that we do have some lower than that, but they meet the minimum wage requirements. And those are usually high school and
Right.
young college kids just working for the summer.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, the ordinance has been moved and seconded. Are there any additional council comments? Are there any public comments? All right, seeing none, this is the first reading of the ordinance. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ordinance passes at first reading. And thank you very much, Wayne.
Thank you.
The next item is the ordinance awarding fuel management system software.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We did a little, had our bid opening this past Friday, and we're recommending that we go with Track Engineering for the fuel management software. And this will allow city staff to use their ID card to be authorized to put gas in the city vehicle.
Okay. And you've got the three bids here, and it looks like the lowest bid is $17,892.75. Somebody's very specific in calculating it. And that's the one that you're going with?
Yeah, we were really impressed with the presentation and the whole package that they submitted.
Okay, good. Does someone want to move the ordinance?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the ordinance? Terry's hand, I saw Terry's hand first. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not sure that you know the answer, but when the Public Works Director was in here a few weeks ago with a request for money or authorization to purchase some new equipment, gas pumps, that I think is part of this whole project, she said that it was much more expensive for us to be buying gasoline at the Exxon station instead of the city purchasing the gas and filling our vehicles day and night here at the city. And I'm just curious if you can shed some light on why it's taken so long for this whole issue to get resolved.
She beat me, though. She got ahead of me. We put out the bid about a month ago. The actual just took that long to get the bid package together and to put it on the street.
But how long has our current system not been working?
I don't know. They would know exactly. It's working to the extent where you can get gas during the day.
But the cards aren't working.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
And I take it the main difference is that the current system doesn't allow to use the card. How have they been getting it?
The current system needs a manual override. It has to be a person there to override it, or somebody with a working card. I believe that's what.
A working card of a different system?
Yeah. I believe there were optical cards that were being used in the gas buoy system.
And was there any other way that this system adds to what we,
Oh, yeah.
a new
Hey there.
capacity?
You're not late, we're just early.
Very early. The current system has features like being able to give the user notices, hey, it's time for your preventive maintenance appointment. And it has an interactive digital screen where you can enter your information, your mileage, your access code. And we think that will be the feature of the reminder feature. That's going to be very beneficial because I know Daryl likes to get notices out to staff that she doesn't see, like policemen, she doesn't see them all the time. So this will get a way of automatically getting the message out to the...
This is the new, you said the current system.
The new system.
The new system.
Yeah.
It also has two interfaces, one with the storage tanks and one with actually other fluids like oil and antifreeze, so it can track what's added in terms of the additional fluids. In terms of the tank, it gives us another way to check for tank tightness. Basically, it'll match what's pumped out with what our tank meter levels are reading and make sure that the numbers are the same. It will produce a report. We can program it to produce the report at a frequency that we determine, weekly, daily, monthly. Basically, we have a system now in place, but this will just give another test to make sure that what we're pumping out is what we've got, matches what we record in the tank. It also gives the ability to lock out, not that we want to do that, but in the event that there's a vehicle that we need to have and we can't get, we can make it so that it can't fuel. Or, for instance, if there's an employee that has left and we want to make sure they're not fueling, we can lock out that card. So it gives us a lot of ability to control access or to add someone at basically a few keystrokes. You know, if someone is taking the car and needs to get a fuel card, they can do that, you know, for a special event or special program. The interface, as I understand it, is going to be quite simple. Just with the PC computer on the mechanic supervisor's desk, he'll be able to communicate with the fuel management system and routinely provide additional notices or control access to the pumps.
Okay, good, thanks.
Any additional questions? Okay, this single reading ordinance has been moved and seconded. Is there any additional council comments? Is there any public comments on the ordinance? Since this funding was in the budget, this ordinance only has to go through one reading. So will the clerk please call the roll? Aye.
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 The ordinance passes. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the second reading, which was postponed from last week, tabled from last week, of the Tacoma Park Code. Now, my understanding of Robert's rules is that if you table it to a time certain, it comes back automatically. You don't have to vote to take it off the table. And that's the assumption I'm proceeding under. So if anybody has a concern about that, this is the time to let me know. Okay, go ahead.
As the mayor indicated, this item was tabled at the last meeting. Following that discussion, we met with the attorney who has added additional language that we hope will address your concerns regarding the apparent unlimited time period in which a purchaser could approach the court and ask for the court to set aside the transaction. If you turn to page 4 of the ordinance itself, the very first paragraph notes that this time period in which the purchaser could ask the court to set aside the transfer would last for a period of 1 year from the date of the transfer of title. And that would apply in the event that the seller failed to provide the purchaser with the required reports that are set forth in the ordinance. And again, that would be the rent reports and the property maintenance or the inspection reports. We have also added on page 5H language clarifying or reaffirming that the real estate agent for both the seller and the purchaser has a duty to inform their respective client of their rights and obligations under this section, and to make them aware of the various rules and regulations that apply in Tacoma Park.
Okay. Are there any council questions, comments? It looks like it pretty much takes care of the concerns that were raised. It does say that the purchaser can essentially negate the sale within a year if they weren't provided the information. But as we spoke about last week, I think that that's important teeth to give the purchaser to ensure that the sellers provide this information. And it also puts a duty on the real estate agents, which I think is a good idea also.
If I might clarify, it provides the purchaser the opportunity to approach the court about setting aside the contract. They
Right.
wouldn't be able to just do it themselves.
Right. But the assumption that I would make, I forget who on the council mentioned this, but it is probably the valid assumption, is that what would most likely happen is that the purchaser would go to the seller and note that they weren't provided this information, and there would be some kind of agreement made between the two of them.
That is always a possibility.
Although the law doesn't provide for that.
The
It
law
doesn't-
does-
It doesn't
this note
restrict
does not
it from
address
doing
that,
that either. So, all right. Would someone like to move this ordinance?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any additional council questions or comments? Are there any public comments on this ordinance? All right, seeing none, since this is the second reading of the ordinance, will the clerk please call the roll? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
The ordinance passes its second reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If Mr. Breeskin is here, could you come up to the table? Good evening. I understand that you are applying for the Emergency Preparedness Committee.
That's right.
And we've got the materials that you sent. And I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about why you're interested in the committee and what you think you can bring to the committee.
That's a big order.
Okay.
I'm a Air Force veteran,
Mm-hmm.
and during my 20 years and 17 days in the military, I specialized in treating the victims of post-traumatic stress disorder. I treated all of the prisoners, for example, who were held in the Hanoi Hilton Air Force pilots for periods of time as long as 6 years. And I helped them make adjustments back into what was left of their civilian lives when they came back. Why I'm particularly attracted to this sort of work is complicated in itself, but I'm a national expert in post-traumatic stress disorder and have lectured all over the country on it. I'm now semi-retired, and I'm at a place in my life where I want to give something back for everything that I've received. And I have a lot of training.
Mm-hmm.
I've taken the course, if you've seen, on human remains retrieval. A very moving experience. I've been around disasters all of my life. As a matter of fact, sometimes I think that life itself is a disaster. But I'm not ready to take on that size of a task.
Mm-hmm.
I have a wide variety of skills, and I'm a new resident to Tacoma Park, and I'm very happy here. I've been here for 2 months, and I want to give something to the community. at any level. You can use my expertise. I'm willing to volunteer it, donate it, as it were. I just, as part of my education in disaster preparedness, I volunteered for the Red Cross program. I have never done that before, and I've attended their first volunteer meeting, and I signed up to be a participant in their disaster preparedness program. And they offer incredible training in everything from CPR to national lectures by experts, and I plan to take all of them that they offer, because that's the way my mind works. If I'm going to invest myself in something, I'm going to learn everything I can about it. I'm a perennial graduate student, even though I have many degrees. So at this point, as soon as I read it in the paper that you were looking for volunteers for emergency preparedness, I said, I can do that.
Okay. Well, thank you. And when you said, when you referred to the training that you had taken, you meant the Red Cross training that you'd taken?
That's part of the training, but and I took that course in human remains retrieval. For many years in an earlier life, I was a member of the Shenandoah Mountain Rescue Club. And what that meant was if somebody got lost in the woods, they would call us out and we would try to find them. And I was very thoroughly briefed and trained in search and rescue kinds of specialties.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your volunteering. Are there questions from other members of the council?
Yeah, I certainly have questions. You know, I've read your material that you presented. Sure. And you talked in there about the course in the fundamentals of psychological preparedness.
Yes.
And, you know, when we talk about emergency preparedness here, that's one aspect I think that we don't think about so much. And I wonder how you see that fits in with the emergency preparedness in the community.
My preferred focus would be to support the teams of people who go out on the site to do the emergency intervention. They have very, very strong feelings about the task that they're doing. They could be working on friends and neighbors and family members. And so the second level of intervention is to nurture the nurturers. And I've been doing that all my professional career.
Yeah, I guess that's my question then, that it sounds like from your material that the majority of your experience is with post-event assistance and help.
That's correct.
And I wonder if you
wasn't on the battlefield itself.
But I just wondered if you had any feelings in preparedness for disasters within a community of how to prepare for those ahead of time.
No, but I'm willing to learn. I'm sure there are protocols. Hurricane Katrina told us the strengths and the flaws and what should be done better, and that's very current. And those sorts of training opportunities are very easy to find. I plan to take them.
And certainly another part of it would be preparing to be able to respond with the assistance for the care for the first responders.
I'll keep my bags packed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there additional questions from members of the council? All right, seeing none, we appreciate your coming forward, and we very much appreciate your volunteering. Thank you. I think the council is going to consider appointments, and then we will make a decision by, let's see, I think this doesn't come up again until I think it's sometime in April, because we miss, but we will definitely let you know.
Great.
Very much appreciate it, and appreciate your volunteering. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Porter?
Yes.
I believe Robbie Kimball had initially planned to address the council on the notification ordinance, which has obviously already been passed. if the council would be willing, she would still like to make the comments that she was unable to give earlier.
Okay. We're running ahead of schedule. Apologies, Robbie. Go
My
ahead.
apologies for being late in getting here. I knew what time it started, and I should have been here.
Well, we're running ahead of the time we published.
Well, thank you. My name is Robbie Kimball. I live at 1004 Hopewell Avenue. I'm a realtor affiliated with Long and Foster Real Estate, and I speak with the benefit of the experience of working with clients who have purchased multi-family properties in Tacoma Park, as well as helping people who are marketing those properties at this time. What I would hope is that the council would, as they develop implementing regulations for the notification requirements, that they would keep in mind that it's really important that if realtors are going to be asked to obey and toe the line on certain regulations, they have to know what they are. I mean, I live in Tacoma Park, and because of my client base, I've really done my best to keep up with what's happening with the regulations. Most realtors are in a reactive mode. As a client comes along who needs us to do something, then we quickly gear up and learn how to do it. I don't know how to do commercial real estate, but I know realtors who do, and I get them involved. I'm careful not to step outside my scope of practice. But I just wanted to please request that the council remember that if there are regulations that realtors need to follow on behalf of themselves, on behalf of their clients, they need to be educated because they don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a very good point. And we'd love to have some help in figuring out to whom we should make this information available. So if I know you volunteered for many other things, Robbie, and we appreciate it. And maybe you could help us with this also.
I would be delighted to work with council and staff in helping see how best to accomplish that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. We are still running ahead of schedule, but my recommendation is that we go ahead and take a short break at this point and come back and do the work session items. back, and we will begin with our first work session item, which is the update on the neighborhood traffic study process. Oh, maybe we won't. It looks like we're not quite ready. Perhaps we could do the C-Safe next. Do we need, I think we have the head of C-Safe and the police chief. Do we need anyone else for that discussion? Okay, we'll go ahead with that. We'll take things a little bit out of order. So we're taking up follow-up discussion on the C-Safe program funding. And since we're running ahead of schedule, I know we're confusing all the staff. We rarely run ahead of schedule, mostly behind, and no one knows what to do. So,
good evening. At our last council meeting, I was asked to make a review of the C-Safe program, since I'd only been here about a week and a half at that point. I have spent an enormous amount of time with Mary Kendall, our very capable director. I've met with Major Davis of Prince George's County, Commander Davis of Silver Spring District, and Chief Major of the Montgomery County Police Department. All the parties, we discussed the current program, what we view as the future of the program, and all are in agreement that the program has been a success to this point and want to continue it and feel that we need to continue with our efforts in an area that is very troublesome to the community and to the business community, and to continue to improve the quality of life down in that area. Some of the efforts that have been undertaken over the last few years are making a difference. As I say in my report, I recommend to you that we continue this program. Hopefully the funding will continue. We did get numbers today, which are, last year we were up to 119,000. This year we're able to apply for 90, right? 90. For 90,000. They reduced what we could apply for, and what that does is there will be no funding this year for gang awareness, which we did last year in 2 of the programs. What they're looking for this year, they're gearing towards the HEAT team and working on problem solving there. Another key thing that they brought up today to Ms. Kendall when she met with them is crime analysis and how important that is to all the jurisdictions working together, analyzing crime and sharing data. And we are looking to just make some proposals in that area for the council to consider at a later date. But all the parties agree that the current path, we must continue along that. We must work with the business leaders down there, the community leaders. We must engage the community, has been done already. And I think if we continue with the efforts we have now, we are going to make a difference. We have made a difference. To stop now, I think, would set us back and set that community back.
So you're endorsing the recommendation that the council endorse 10 to 15,000 on an annual basis. And I noticed that we've got, last year there's 25,000 from Montgomery County. Do we think we're going to get the same thing this coming year?
They're still waiting on their negotiations with the state, because that money is actually through the Montgomery County Collaboration Council. They're a local management board, and they're going to be negotiating with the state for that funding, and they'll know in April.
Okay. And how about the community organizer from Prince George's County? I assume that that's a person that they pay out of their funds?
Right, right, and they'd be located in our office as an in-kind contribution.
Those are, both of them, significant contributions from the 2 counties. Certainly.
To give you a little, we will be working with Prince George's County and Montgomery County. Our next joint project will be in the spring. We're going to initiate bicycle patrols between the 3 jurisdictions. As I think I reported, we're putting our bike squad back together. It's been in mothballs for about 3 years, and we hope to have it on the street in about 6 weeks. One of the first projects will be riding with Prince George's County and with Montgomery County down on the Crossroads area. We'll obviously be using it throughout the city also. Another place we're going to be targeting, although we're not talking about it tonight, will be the metro station in that area. We're using the bikes there also.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have comments? Yeah, Colleen?
Well, I want to thank you both for all the work that you do. I think that this is a great program, and that I think we need to do our part to provide long-term stability for the program so that we can maintain program staff. I think, our program staff is everything to the program, and I would really like to see the people that we have now and that we have, invested relationships with, and they have invested relationships in the community, stay. And I know that there are 2 other jurisdictions, but it sounds like you're continuing to work with them to ensure stability for them. So I'm supportive of this, and I don't want us to, end up footing the whole bill, but it doesn't sound like that's really a big risk here. The other jurisdictions are very invested in this. I know that if Doug were here, he would have many eloquent things to say about how wonderful you all are and how important you are to the community, and that this is, absolutely imperative that we continue to provide all kinds of support for this. I'm not as eloquent as he is, but maybe he'll come back and say more later.
You're too humble.
Any other comments? Terry?
Thank you. Well, I'll just double what Councilmember Clay said. I really have been impressed with the work that's been done by the CSAFE group, and I really think it's grown to the point now where it's really going to see its most effect in the community and the greatest benefit. There was a lot of time in projects like this it takes to get organized and get the relationships built, and I think we're at that point now, and I certainly want to support the work. But I think that, as I said, several weeks ago, Chief Rakucci is the one who's responsible for policing in Tacoma Park and for the public safety, and so I depend heavily on your advice on this, and also I think it's important that the project be under your control as the chief of police here in Tacoma Park. And so for at least Tacoma Park's work, I think the structure that we have here with Ms. Kendall working for you is the right structure. And I'd like to see this money come right out of your budget if that's what you think is the best way to to address the policing in that area.
Wherever you put the money, I'll find a way to spend it for you. There's no problem there. Let me just add, in coming in from the outside, this was one of the more difficult projects to understand. I got a lot of things in the mail, but being here, and this starts my 5th week, I've spent a lot of time with Mary, but more I've spent with Chief Manger, with Commander Davis and Major Davis, and all 3 of them have complimented, and I have to agree with them in just the short time I've been here. We have some able leadership in Mary Kendall, who's committed not as just a worker, but somebody who goes the extra mile for the residents down there and has a commitment to making a difference. And I consider it an honor to have such a employee that's so dedicated, working for the department. It makes my job a lot easier. And in evaluating this program, the program spoke for itself. I didn't have to hear it from Mary, although she's told me everything you possibly want to know about the program, which makes you good as somebody coming in when there's so much different money in so many jurisdictions. You want to make sure it's right, and she's on top of every number that she's doing. And one of the things that the city manager told me, just check with her. She knows where it's coming from and where it's going and how it's spent. And I'm very pleased to have somebody, because it's important when you're managing grants to be on top of those numbers, to get our reports in on time, and Mary has done that. But it makes me feel good as I go and meet in the last 2 weeks with the other jurisdictions, their confidence in Mary and how she runs the program, and it keeps everybody together, and she works hard. Even though I think her heart's with us at the most, she works very hard to make sure that Montgomery County and PG County both get equal treatment, and they do get it, and they all feel that way. So she represents us well.
I thank you for those comments, and Mary, we certainly have noticed, I've noticed the changes in the CSAFE program under your guidance, and really appreciate that. I think that there is much stronger relationship now that comes some through the maturity of the project, but also a great deal from your leadership, and I thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just ask a question of the city manager. I think this comes, speaking of funding from other jurisdictions, do we have any sense of where we stand with the day labor center that Prince George's is supposed to be funding?
It's going much more slowly than I think any of us would like. I think if the council is aware, they have identified a site in Prince George's County, kind of near the Bank of America. There's an alleyway that runs behind that, if you know where I'm talking about, just off of New Hampshire, just north of New Hampshire and University intersection. Casa de Maryland will be operating that on behalf of Prince George's County. The location, as I understand it, has some accessibility issues. Obviously, they're required to meet certain, federal laws and other permitting requirements, and I think they're still trying to go through that. Our expectation is that it will open. I think the original plan was around July. I think that's highly unlikely at this point. We're all hopeful that it will open sometime in fiscal 08. In the interim, I have been in discussions with Montgomery County. They have pledged funding for all of FY08. Should it be necessary for us to continue operating our very temporary site on New Hampshire. And as I had advised the council by email, it did not go into the county executive's original budget submittal just because of printing deadlines, but they have made at least a verbal commitment, and it should go in as an amendment to the county council in April, that if we need to operate our site for all of fiscal 08, they will pick up 100% of the cost.
Okay, well, I very much appreciate that information. Bruce?
Mary, if you could just say a couple things about the ex-offenders opportunity fair. I was intrigued by that.
It was on March 8th, and we got about 60 participants from the community. I mean, we heavily advertised it via flyer and laundromats, through parole and probation, and posted flyers in jails. So we had a really great turnout. That's the highest number of offenders from the community who had ever come to one of our social service and employment fairs. And we had about somewhere between 25 and 30 service providers and employers. And it started out with a very long presentation about expungement, which I think discouraged a couple people. But there were resources there waiting to help them out once they learned the news that it's very difficult to expunge a felony. But it was a really good fair. We had a great turnout.
I just want to say, I had the privilege of being a part of the Bi-County Task Force on Gang Violence some years back, and learned through that at that time, and certainly true now, that the Tacoma-Langley area is one of the focuses of a lot of gang activity, some of the new gang activity that's coming in out of the area. And we've had some very serious crimes coming out of that, but I think that this program has been effective in reducing the amount of crime that we might have otherwise had. Doug had sponsored a couple of panels of people talking about gang violence, and one of the messages of those panels was that it's much more effective to prevent gang violence than it is to try and deal with it after it happens. And I think many of the things that CSAFE does are very effective in preventing not just gang-related violence, but other kinds of things. And I think that it's probably one of the more effective things that we can do, and it's certainly focused in the right area. And so I'm very supportive of doing what we can to see that it continues. People have talked about how effective it is as a program, and I think it's also a program that's directed at the right kind of problem in the right place. So I appreciate that also. Anybody else?
I'll just add my support for this program and tell you how envious I am that you already have it set up. In the metro area, we're trying to get Safe Tacoma set up, and it's no easy task. But I know that with your help, your guidance, that we will succeed there. I do support this, as I indicated during the last budget discussion, and I think that by strengthening this program, it will strengthen initiatives of this type. So thank you for coming to us with this.
Not to be too discouraging, but it took CSAFE almost 3 years to get up and running. So. Anybody else? Okay, I think it seems as if the council is willing to dedicate the requested funding to keeping the program going. So I think that goes as direction to the city manager as she prepares the budget. And thank you both, and thank you, Mary, for the efforts that you've made over the years. And I think the fact that the program is running well, I agree with everybody else, has been largely a testament to your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we will do the discussion of the neighborhood traffic studies. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule. I know that everyone is shocked that we are, so we keep surprising people by taking up their items before they're ready.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This evening, I'm giving you an update on the neighborhood traffic studies. Since we last presented the studies, we have solicited requests for traffic calming studies from the neighborhoods based on and given them the criteria that we discussed at the last session. And we received 3 requests. We received 3 requests from neighborhood associations and 1 additional request from a council member. And we lined everything up against the criteria and we ranked them. We have also issued an RFP and forwarded the information that was related to state highways to State Highway. And essentially, we have what we would consider 4 viable candidates for a traffic calming study that includes a network of streets that addresses mainly city streets. Like, it might intersect with the state highway, but it's really talking about traffic and speed and volume control on city streets, on a network of streets that we've included in the RFP that was issued. The RFP responses should come back in the middle of April, and we should be ready to select a contractor by the end of April.
Is your assumption that we will be able to do the studies on all of these areas or less than all of them?
My assumption is that we would do it on less than all of them, but we're going to include all of them. We also included a bid option whereby a neighborhood could do the data collection. And so each consultant has the option to reduce their price based on neighborhood collection of data.
I remember when we did this before, some years ago, the cost of having the specialists sit there and count cars is very high. And if the neighborhood can do the data collection, and, you know, I was one of the people who collected data, you have to sit in one workshop and they, you know, teach you how to use the little charts that you mark things down on. It's not that difficult to do. It really reduced the cost on those bids that we got some years ago, or however we did it, I don't remember, quite a bit to have the neighborhood do the data gathering. I would also note one other thing. Looking at this, if anybody was thinking that getting a council member to submit your request would give you a leg up, the chart here certainly doesn't bear that out. Actually, I would think you'd probably be better off not having a council member make your request. So, no bias here. Bruce and then Colleen.
If I can just point out that I've already spoken with Nellie Moxley of Pinecrest, who's here, and the neighborhood would be willing to participate in the traffic counts to try and reduce the cost to make sure that their work gets done. And then I just have one question. I want to make sure I understand the chart correctly. On my requests, I had the 3 requests for Pinecrest, Tacoma Junction, and Sycamore Elm, and the action down at the bottom corresponds to those 3, so that Tacoma Junction was referred to State Highway and Sycamore is being done internally?
Actually, Tacoma Junction was also referred to State Highway.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Right. Okay, sorry. Yes, it would be in that order.
Okay.
The order doesn't really relate to, the order relates to the jurisdiction, so whichever jurisdiction that area is in would be, that was actually just the order it was fairly arbitrary. But
it just happened to correlate to the way they were listed?
Yes.
Okay.
That's how it stands.
Only in your column, though.
Oh. Well, I ordered them correctly.
That's right. Correct input. I apparently did not do very well with the input. So this isn't exactly the process that I thought it was going to be, and I will accept all the blame for not being able to understand this properly. I thought that we were going to come back to the council and discuss the ranking, but you folks already ranked them, which I think is great because it removes the politics from the process. However, one of the questions that I guess I remember asking a couple times was, would the elements that I had already presented from the very beginning be included in the RFP? And I know I asked that question a couple times, and I thought that the answer was yes.
The elements that you had already...
Well, yeah, because I talked about this when I first brought it up and talked about Long Branch Sligo being ready to go. I also talked about the Forest Park issues, and then I know Bruce and I had a conversation one time up here about the Jackson Avenue, kind of the Lincoln corridor. And I guess in the process of talking about that, one of the things that we talked about was that a lot of this is driven by the problems at Tacoma Junction, and that if we could solve a lot of the Tacoma Junction problems, we'd solve a lot of the issues that happen as people try to cut through, I guess that's Columbia and Sycamore and those streets, down to Elm, and then frequently they cut out through Prince George's or Poplar.
Okay.
And then the Jackson Avenue, Lincoln, is again people trying to avoid the Tacoma Junction if they're headed north. And since they can no longer turn right in the mornings and evenings at Jackson, all that, the impact that really has is just to back them up to get into the neighborhood of Elm. It doesn't reduce cut-through traffic. It actually takes them off of the arterial even sooner and puts them into the substreets. And so Forest Park then isn't on here, and Jackson and Lincoln, and it's really the Lincoln corridor, but it all kind of plays out around what's happening at Jackson and Lincoln. I mean, what happens there actually has impacts all the way back to Auburn and Devonshire. It's kind of that Lincoln corridor.
Okay.
So what did I do wrong? Because I was sure that these were going to be included after I had asked about it a couple times, but clearly I was wrong.
I did rely on written material. I can go back. I'm assuming this was probably testimony during council meetings.
Yeah.
And so we can go back and look at that and see how it can be incorporated. One of the things that I would like to say about Tacoma Junction is that State Highway is doing a roundabout study. They just got the traffic counts from the department that does traffic counts. The snow and ice and everything held up how their process for taking traffic counts. So they did just get them last Friday, and they're expecting to have a report in 4 to 5 weeks. I had some discussion with them because they said that the counts were quite high. So there's some question about whether or not the size of roundabout that would be needed will fit in that intersection, but I'd like to wait until we see the report and see what it says.
Okay. But those are still a fairly heavy impact area. The people in Forest Park are kind of going crazy with all the traffic.
Okay.
And, you know, we've put in speed bumps on Woodland and speed bumps on Conway, and now they're talking about speed bumps on Prince George's and speed bumps on Circle, and it you know, runs the risk of becoming a giant speed bump. And I think it's been interesting to see how the traffic circle at Lincoln and Elm, and those changes are definitely going to slow people down. I think it's going to help our speed issue a lot, but in terms of the volume issue, the people on Jackson Avenue, I don't know if they complain. They're entirely in my ward, aren't they? You don't have any side of that, but they're going crazy with people speeding up and down. I mean, I think maybe it was Daryl that was probably the party to the discussions about could we have it be a one-way street? You know, could we? For a while they were talking about putting those little curb stops along one side so that they could have a sidewalk, and we had some discussion about kind of the relationship between it's not just a Ward 2 issue, it's kind of that whole relationship, and anything that you do in one area, like obviously the Jackson Avenue no right turn probably helps a little bit, but it has a big negative impact back on the Elm, Lincoln, Auburn, Larch entryways to the neighborhood, because then people just enter there and they speed that much faster. Do you have anything to add to that, Bruce?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Great. I thank you, Mayor Porter. I noticed prominently displayed in column number 1, it says that Mr. Seaman's request does not meet the scope of the project on Ritchie Avenue. I wonder if you could just speak to that a little.
Sure. Ritchie Avenue being one street as opposed to a network was not included because I think that's something that we can address internally. Between the police department, public works, and planning, we can look at traffic calming issues on Ritchie Avenue as a unit, as opposed to other neighborhoods which have several streets where if you put traffic calming on one street, it impacts the other streets. And so because it's one single street, we can look at that street as a unit.
The reason it confuses me a little is because my request asked for it to be done as part of the project that's being done in Silver Spring in the Hilltop and Parkside Avenue area. Right. And so that seems like it is a network of streets. It just so happens that Ritchie Avenue is the only one of those that's within Tacoma Park. But yet it seems just as important as if all the streets are within the corporation limits.
I would have to look into what they're proposing and how. I mean, I would think that as they look at that, they would have to look at how it impacts Ritchie.
And my understanding is they're looking at closing roads and keeping
Right.
Parkside and those streets from being cut-through streets from Maple Avenue on up to Piney Branch Road. And the concern is that leaves Ritchie Avenue as being the primary cut-through road then for the traffic that no longer is going to be able to take those other streets. They're actually talking about closing some of the access points and making some of the streets one way.
Right. And I understood that as part of that, we would also look at closing some of our roads or making some of our roads one way, depending on what the neighborhood requested from us when we met with the Public Works Department for the county. There was some discussion about streets adjacent to that neighborhood and where traffic would go, and I thought that the neighborhood was going to come back with us with their requests. And so when I saw Parkside and Hillside, I thought that was a reference to those streets. I didn't realize it was a reference to Ritchie.
Well, nonetheless, I think it is a network of roads problem. All but Ritchie and maybe Geneva are, and I guess maybe Mississippi could be thrown in there, but for the most part, it's Ritchie Avenue is going to be the primary cut-through if the county does go through with some of the initial designs that they have. And I think it's important, whether it be part of this project or some other project, I think the city needs to be proactive in making sure that one morning we don't wake up and have all the traffic coming up Ritchie Avenue. Right. And then the other thing, as you point out, the question of a street light at the corner of Ritchie and Piney Branch Road is a state highway question. But I think the city needs to play a role in that. In helping to facilitate state highways doing that evaluation again, since it's been a number of years since they did the evaluation, and there continues to be concerns, especially during the rush hour when kids are going to school, with people driving up the middle lane of Piney Branch Road, and turning out of Ritchie Avenue into that middle lane.
We have asked State Highway to reevaluate that intersection.
Okay. I appreciate that. And then the one other thing, and maybe it is what you're alluding to when you say that it's a Public Works or a Police Department issue, is a roundabout at Ritchie, Geneva, and Oswego, where there certainly is enough room, and that's a area where neighborhood residents frequently point out the disregard for the stop signs, and it seems like that would be an area where a small roundabout might be a good solution that slows people down through that intersection.
Okay. There certainly is a lot of room there. And it's a confusing intersection because there is so much room.
And there's the school buses and trash trucks and other public works vehicles that go through there, in addition to the volume of traffic that goes down the road.
Alana, I hope you'll remove one of the columns since there's clearly duplication there, but I do remember bringing to you a request from the neighbors on Birch Avenue where there's 2 blocks missing a sidewalk. They would like some kind of discussion about traffic calming there. When we offered them a sidewalk, that was not to their liking, but I know that surrounding neighbors would like to see some solution so that kids have a safe way to walk to school. What's the disposition of that one?
Birch Avenue is somewhat included, but the request that the Birch Avenue sidewalk came in was fairly complex. So, and there were a lot of issues raised, which are also public works issues. It was a request that talked a lot about parking and sidewalks and biking and other types of issues. So I think that request should also go to Public Works because there are requests for additional sidewalks and requests for changes in direction. So that we'll look at it internally as well as putting it into the RFP.
So it is in the RFP?
It is in the RFP.
Okay.
However, the RFP...
I'd feel more comfortable if you could list it somewhere in that identified roadways category.
It's actually in the Otra neighborhood.
Can you tell me where?
It's contained within where we said identified roadways, neighborhood.
So neighborhood means other streets in addition to the ones specifically listed?
Correct.
Okay, so neighborhood means that...
it's a collection of streets within the neighborhood.
And it would take up too much room to list them?
I can list them.
It would be helpful. I know the people who are interested in the Birch Avenue would like to see them listed. Now,
could you maybe just list Birch so that people are aware that it's in there? Go ahead, sorry.
That's all right. And you don't need to have the duplication because I believe that when I submitted this, I was reinforcing what Otra had asked for and then making sure that this Birch Avenue was on there because I hadn't seen it on the Otra list. And I think that's it.
One of the long-term issues, I'm very glad we're doing this because we did a series of neighborhood traffic studies some years back, but one of the long-term issues is that there is more traffic, not just in Tacoma Park, but in the entire region than there was even when we were doing this, say, 10 or so years ago. And I remember some of the recommendations that came out of some of these neighborhood traffic studies 10 or so years ago, the neighborhoods weren't willing to accept. There were some fairly major recommendations as well. I mean, there were things like you know, bump outs and speed humps, but there were also things like one-way streets and some other things like that that the neighborhoods weren't willing to accept. It may be that as the traffic has continued to get worse, people are more willing to accept these more drastic measures because the problem that the people are trying to address has become more serious also. But I think it's also, someone mentioned the issue of volumes of traffic. There's an issue with volume that no amount of traffic calming is going to be able to deal with. If someone has to drive from, say, Hyattsville or College Park into Silver Spring, they have to go through this area. They have to get through there one way or the other. And we can redirect traffic, we can slow it down, but we're not going to make it go away. The only way to make it go away, warning, here comes an ad. The only way to make it go away is to provide people with alternative means of getting around, such as transit, like the Purple Line. And I think one of the big benefits of the Purple Line would be to give people a way to move from Hyattsville and College Park to Silver Spring without driving through the middle of Tacoma Park. And absent something like that, there really isn't any other way for them to do it. And so they're going to, even if we make it difficult for them and force them to slow down, which I'm very much in favor of, they're still going to drive through because they really don't have any other choice. So I think in the short term, I'm very much in favor of these traffic calming studies. I think they're important to keep people going at safe speeds within the neighborhoods. But for the long term, the only way we're going to reduce volume is to give the people who are driving through our neighborhoods another alternative other than getting in their car and driving to work or wherever they're going. So I think we should keep in mind both the short term and the long term. Are there any other questions or thoughts about this process? Okay, thank you. We appreciate it. And the final item on our agenda this evening is our legislative update.
Good evening. We've got about 2.5 weeks left of the state legislative session, and I wanted to mention that there's a number of good news items so far. One that I'm pleased to talk about for a moment is the street lighting bill that was a priority of the Maryland Municipal League, was adopted by both houses, and it was adopted on an expedited schedule so that it takes effect on June 1st. And this is a way for municipalities to save money and have more control over street lighting in their communities. Another Maryland Municipal League priority is the municipal electrical aggregation. I know the mayor testified again on that, the House side last week. Mm-hmm. And according to MML, no decision has been made on that yet, but they're also trying to put language that helps have municipal electrical aggregation in some of the other language and the other bills that relate to re-regulation of the electrical industry in Maryland. So I'm not sure that it's a done deal, but at least there's a number of efforts being put forward to get that point of that, which is, again, to save some money for the municipalities and for the residents in municipalities and meet other kinds of environmental goals. Another environmental issue is the Senate has passed the mercury switch removal bill. The House has not yet acted on it that I know of as of today. But on the House side, I do know that Tom Hucker was particularly helpful to the Environmental Committee on the Environment regarding that item. And they were very thankful for that. There was a proposed preemption of rent control bill. That bill has been withdrawn, and I was particularly glad to see that because it would have meant a good amount of work to prepare for that and to take that issue on. However, my guess is that it is going to be something that comes back next year. It is a national effort to preclude municipalities from having the authority to do rent control. for whatever goals they feel they need to take that step on. There's a notice requirement on condominium conversions that was adopted already. And this is one that I testified along with Jamie Raskin, and it came out of a problem that he actually assisted a Tacoma Park tenant on in the past couple of years. So that was nice to see something follow through on that. It wasn't opposed by the apartment owners. They had an amendment to it so that it practically worked a little better for them. But it was a really important step to make sure that people find out what they're given the opportunity to purchase their units when a building is taken over from apartments and being switched to condominium. But if you don't know what the price is going to be, you can't tell if it's something that you're going to be able to work a deal with or not. And the problem it was having is you were told, well, you're able to buy your apartment, but not till much later where you find out what the price would be. And so that was a very good move to make sure that you have enough time to make an adequate decision. I'd like to mention that our District 20 reps have been very responsive and helpful. I've been very pleased with their staff people, and it's nice to see their eagerness to help Tacoma Park. And I really do appreciate the interest that they have expressed in trying to help Tacoma Park. As mentioned before, we had presentations on the Community Center Bond Bill request on March 10th. It'll be still another probably 2 weeks before we know if any funds will be available to us from the legislature for that. We're going to wait and see what happens over the next 2.5 weeks, and I'll keep you up to date on that. Anybody who wants to make any calls on all these things, emails, this is the time before they completely are hunkered down into their very long day sessions as they finish up the budget issues. You need to get your comments in very quickly.
I wanted to second your thanks to the District 20 delegates and Senator for the help that they've given. Both you and I have had the opportunity to meet with several of them several times, and they've all of them worked very hard and done a great job. Wanted to mention a couple of other things on the municipal aggregation. I think getting the wording on municipal aggregation into the re-regulation or the public, I'm forgetting the name of it, the Public Service Commission legislation is very important, because the pushback we were getting on municipal aggregation was, well, we don't need to do this. We're going to revitalize the Public Service Commission and re-regulate the electrical industry, and so this is unnecessary. And one of the points that MML was making is that this is not an either or. You can do both, and it certainly, if a piece of it doesn't succeed, or if you can make additional inroads or additional reductions in cost, and also municipal electrical aggregation offers the opportunity for enabling people to purchase green energy. And so I think getting that language in those bills is an important step. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there was a discussion at the Maryland MML meeting last week about the streetlight bill. PEPCO, in addition to other things that it's doing, is proposing a 40% increase in the streetlight maintenance cost for municipalities. So this provides even more of an incentive for us to try and purchase streetlights. The other thing is that the MML chapter paid an attorney to intervene in the rate increase decision process. We paid him simply to write a letter so we can set the process in motion. And the chapter spent some time talking about what the next step is. The next step is apparently for the attorney to do some legal research to get a good sense of what we could do, how effective it might be, that kind of thing. There's going to be some follow-up contact with the municipalities, and then each municipality can participate in the next step or not. And if we do participate, we would obviously have to fund some of the attorney's time. So that's something that may be coming back before the council before too long.
That's right, and related to that are also just some kind of public education efforts to understand what's involved in this and how expensive it could be to the municipalities, and so that people understand why it's a good idea for us to
Right.
to have some
And there's also some concern that we not get caught in a issue where Pepco says that they need to raise maintenance costs because the streetlights are getting old and needing a lot of maintenance, and on the other hand, trying to sell them to us for a lot of money because they're in such good shape. So we wanted to make sure that we don't sort of get caught in the middle of one of those arguments. So I think there's a number of issues that are related to each other, and we need to sort of keep on top of all of them simultaneously. But we should be getting some information from the attorney and from the Kensington council member Al Carr, who initiated this effort, that will give us a better sense of where we might be going for the next step. And then there will probably be something that has to come back to the council for us to decide how we would like to follow up on that. Bruce and then Terry.
Go ahead first.
I just wanted to thank you, Susie, for the work that you put into this legislative priorities this year. I see a significant increase in the amount of information that we've received and the amount of work that you've done in trying to drive these things through. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
And again, my appreciation for this ramped up effort. And it's interesting to me that a number of entities besides Tacoma Park are ramping up efforts to try and track legislation and work on getting input. And to that end, I copied my colleagues on the council with the federal budget analysis that was done by COG staff from the board meeting last week, and then gave you a second packet with the legislative update from the Chesapeake Bay and Water Resources Policy Committee on Friday. And the one that I wanted to mention that you got copies of in your boxes was this Environmental Matters bill on the Chesapeake Bay Green Fund. And my notes on that, in addition to what the COG staff provided, this bill may have legs. It's being, the primary sponsors are the two chairs of the environment committees. And the thing that could impact us is, on the one hand, they're proposing an amendment to it to make sure that the split for the funds that come into that, 1/3 of that would come back to local jurisdictions to be used for stormwater retrofits. But the good news, bad news, the bad news piece is that they're proposing that the tax would be collected by local governments. It would add to our tax rate, and then we would have to pass that money along to the state, and then they would send it back to us. And for all of our trouble, we would be the ones blamed for a tax increase, and they're proposing that we might get to keep 5% for administrative costs. So it's good news and bad news.
Right. One of the things that I think actually that's indicative of much of the legislation right now in Annapolis is that there's a lot of creativity, especially around environmental issues, but there's extreme nervousness about the state tax rate and anything that's related to that. And if they can get us to look like it was our tax rate, that's...
This is a cousin to the unfunded mandate.
Right.
Is there anybody we can get to collect taxes for us?
We can get it. Before I end, I want to mention that, unfortunately, I forgot to double check the date, but I think it's next week is the Park and Planning CIP Budget Forum. We'll get some more detailed information out to you very shortly about the items on that. And then in early April, mid-April, are the county budget hearings. And I've requested the evening of April 10th as the date that we testify as a city. We need to determine what we're going to testify for, but we always do, and we want to make sure that we have an effective presentation on that. So I just want to kind of keep those as things that are upcoming, and look out for the testimony, and your input and ideas on that are very welcome.
Just to mention one other thing very quickly, there was a lot of discussion about long-term structural budget deficits in the state budget this year, but actually nothing has been done about them yet. in part because they don't actually start hitting until next year. But I would anticipate that over the long term, it's going to make it very difficult for anything that requires any funding to move through the state legislature, and we should probably expect that to begin starting next year. I hope that this will create some innovative thinking about funding various kinds of state budget needs, but we'll have to probably wait until next year to see anything comprehensive done on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there may be some recommendations that we might want to make, and our Representative Sheila Hickson is in an excellent position
Yes.
to discuss money at the state level. You know, one of my concerns has always been the bond bill process, which I think there's so many good projects that come before them, but it's somewhat of a difficult process to know how those things are judged. Maybe there's a different approach for something like that that would be helpful to Tacoma Park. But there may be a variety of different kinds of structures. I know there's been lots of discussion, kind of outgrowths of the TASB committee, about different ways of funding certain needs in our communities. And I guess I would just recommend that if you have some of those ideas and we want to send a letter to Sheila Hickson, I think that that's something that's probably a good recipient for those suggestions.
And along those same lines, it's been very interesting for me to read it's now, I guess, today was day 11 of the 25-part series in the Washington Post on federal earmarks and Cassidy and Associates, and it's been very interesting for somebody who considers himself to not be a policy wonk to read that and understand how those budget requests evolved with the federal government and similar types of things with the state.
All right, is there any other thoughts, questions, comments? I just want to end by thanking you. I know that you put in huge amounts of time during legislative season, and very much appreciate your family's willingness to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing else, we're adjourned.
Jesus